Welcome to today's Conversation Series program, Women in Leadership. Margot Hoyt, Managing Director, Talent and Leadership Development at LHH, will be speaking with Barb Keenan, Senior Vice President, Human Resources Division at LCBO. Today, Margot and Barb are talking about what it means to be a woman in the workplace, both today and as we look to the future. We will be taking questions at the end of the conversation. Please use the Q&A function to enter your questions anytime during the session, and we'll respond to as many questions as possible. Hosting today's program is Margot Hoyt. Over to you, Margot.
Thank you very much, Laura, and your able assistant in the background there, piping in as well. So pleased to be here today for the fourth in our conversation series with Barb Keenan. For those of you who aren't familiar with LHH, just very quickly, we help companies see the possibilities in their people. So as you're transforming your organizations, we're there partnering with you through executive search and recruitment, assessment, development, coaching, career strategies, and of course, career transition, if that's what's in your future. We are delighted to have Barb with us today. Barb's been a friend of LHH Knightsbridge over the past, and her story is one that is inspiring and her wisdom is insightful. So really looking forward to sharing her perspectives with all of you today. Just a quick bio so that you get a little bit of the background on Barb. She's currently, as Laura said, the Senior Vice President of Human Resources at the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, or LCBO. She has more than 25 years in increasingly responsible HR roles. Before joining LCBO, she spent a large part of her career in the energy sector with both OPG and Ontario Hydro, as well as with the professional services organization. So through this, you can see she's seen the unionized and the non-unionized environments. Throughout her career, she's really been focused on transformation, raising the bar for leadership, and creating safe, healthy, and inclusive cultures. She's passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, mental health, leadership, and coaching others. In 2018, Barb received the Denton Senior Executive of the Year Award from the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. That's a terrific recognition for her commitment to creating an inclusive culture. In addition to Barb's corporate roles, she shared that she feels a strong accountability to pay it forward. We'll talk more about that today. And for the past 6 years, Barb's been on the board of directors for the YWCA Toronto, and she's currently the board president there. So welcome, Barb.
Thanks so much, Margot. Pleasure to be here.
In this whole conversation series started in the spirit of International Women's Day, which broadened into International Women's Month and now season. And it's just a really great opportunity, as I said, to celebrate the achievements of some incredible Canadian women executives, and also to inspire other organizations and other women to really accelerate the advancement of women. So it's going to be a great opportunity for us. You and I are going to have the opportunity to have a chat for about the next 30 minutes. I get to ask you all of my favorite questions, but then as Laura said, we'll open it up to the viewers. And this is your reminder, viewers, please, as we're going through the whole hour together, put your questions in the Q&A section, and I'll be working very hard to get most of those questions to Barb and to hear her responses. So without further ado, shall we get started?
That'd be great.
Great. So I shared a little bit about some of your success and your focus, Barb, in the introduction, but it would be great to hear in your words and in your voice a little bit about your story. Can you share some of the turning points, the milestones from your career to date?
Sure, I would love to do that. So, you know, I will share with everybody, I did get a chance to see some of the questions ahead of time. So I've had a little chance to prepare, and this was a great question actually for me to really reflect upon what those key moments or turning points were in my career. So I thought of 4 in particular I thought I'd share with all of you. The first is the first time I decided to put my hat in the ring for a management role. And at the time, you know, I knew I was ready, I was excited, but that moment coincided when I found out I was also pregnant for the first time. So the decision was, do I go for it now? And I thought, absolutely. So found myself in the interview, and I had the moral dilemma. Do I say I am? Do I say I'm not? So I thought, absolutely, you got to be upfront about these things and be transparent. So I shared that with the boss at the time, and I thought, okay, well, we'll see where that goes. And remember, this was back in the 90s, right? Yeah. Different time, early 90s. So got the call a couple of weeks later, and my new boss, CEO, said, well, Keenan, you got the job. But I got to tell you, when I asked other people what I should do, they said, she's with child, you shouldn't do it. And he said, but I knew you were the best candidate. So the one thing I'll ask you is to make sure you got a great replacement when you're on mat leave. And for me, that was a bit of a moment, right? And he became one of my biggest allies and advocates. And so one learning for me out of that was that you got to believe in yourself. You got to be authentic, you got to be transparent, and go with your gut.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And a bit of a pioneer, this manager of yours, to be able to do that, to buck the trend, which was quite prevalent at that point.
Was indeed.
Yeah,
for sure, Margot. And then I would say, second decision was, I had the good fortune, although I've spent most of my career in HR, to become the project director for an initiative at OPG to outsource our IT. And largely, I was offered that role because we were 90% unionized, and it was such an important function of doing an outsourcing role. So once we were successful and we were about to move on the transaction, I did have the opportunity to join Capgemini or stay with OPG. And at the time, it felt like a really weighty decision. And my boss and friend said to me, listen, live large. What do you got to lose, right? What's the worst thing you have? It's time you left the mothership, and you should get more experience. And in fact, once again, it's about taking risks and really believing that you can do it. And some of the research I've seen is a lot of women don't feel like they're ever ready and won't put up their hands. So for me, that was a really wonderful moment. And I will tell you, I am so glad I did, because that was probably the richest, most demanding, most exponential growth I've ever had in my whole career. It was amazing, right? Working for a global organization, heavily matrixed, greenfield. It was just an awesome experience. And a friend of mine always says that uncomfortable feeling you have is growth. And I would never give up those 7 years experience. So that was a really important pivotal moment for me. Next, I would say, so 7 years at Capgemini, did a ton of travel when I was there. And I also had very young children at the time. So I always think about, life's like 3 legs of a stool. There's professional, there's your personal, and then there's your family. And if any one, or especially those 2 legs, are wobbly, then the stool's going to fall over, right? So as I was going through this experience, great small kids, but I was traveling a ton. I came home very late one evening, sweeping bargaining at 2, and it was Valentine's Day. And when I came in, of course, everybody was asleep. And there was a picture of not Flat Stanley, but Flat Mummy at the dinner table. And I burst into tears. And I realized the time had come for me to get myself in balance. So very fortunately at that time, an opportunity came up at OPG, and it was a wonderful transition. But when I think about, juggling family and professional requirements, sometimes you have to make sure you make decisions in that vein.
Yeah. And there are different phases, right, Barb? Like as you go through your life, different phases where you can have different priorities and focus.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Margot. It's so true. And it's important to allow yourself to go through those periods and the ebbs and flows of what that can mean for different parts of your life. And then lastly, and I would say, this was a really meaningful moment. So I had the absolute wonderful good fortune and privilege of being the chief HR officer for almost a decade at OPG, and loved the company, loved my team. I had a wonderful chance to make a difference. Oops, sorry. And the benefits of working at home. I found myself in a position where I was in a transition. And at the time, it was a very difficult time because, you know, I really cared about my team and it was difficult to leave. However, in hindsight, this is about 2 years ago, it was such a gift. The gift of time, the gift of having the opportunity to recharge and really reflect on what was important to me. And I, once again, you know, total gift. And that gave me a chance to think about what I wanted to do next in my career. And what I realized at this point in my career, and maybe it's 25 plus, closer to 30 years experience, it was a real opportunity for me to make sure the organization I went to was in line with my values, a place that really cared about people, where I could make a difference and drive some of the cultural change that mattered to me most. And that is truly creating an inclusive workplace where, and it sounds cliche, but I'm so passionate and believe it so much, where everybody feels, you know, respected, valued, and heard, because I believe that really produces sustainable business results. So, you know, those are 4 steps in my journey. And with grown-up kids now, I have the luxury of being able to put that time and energy.
It's fascinating how we look at those major career transitions for you, a lot around shifting organizations, really a new community that you're going to be moving into as you make those changes, right? It's easy to be comfortable and stay where you have a strong network, where people know you. You don't have to work as hard sometimes just to have the kind of influence that you need to have, right? When you've been in an organization, you've already proven yourself for a long time. So that kind of stretching seems like it's been a really big part of your own development.
Yes, I mean, it certainly has. And I was going to say, and in the case of being in a role for almost a decade, I wasn't taking my own advice, although my role stretched and morphed and I had tons of opportunity. The advice I give to others is normally never allow yourself to get too comfortable and always try something new. So yeah, very true, Margot. Agreed.
Yeah, really very interesting. Now, you shared with me before that you've always gravitated to leadership roles. I'm sure we could go back to the playground as a young girl. But as you've advanced in your career and you become a senior executive, how do you think being a woman has really affected your career?
So I would say being a woman has affected my career, and I'm going to put it into 2 chunks of my life. The first half of my career, to be quite honest with you, I really didn't even think about, can you give me 1 minute? Sorry.
Sure. This is the great thing about live TV. We've got background noise and life interrupts.
So the life of living in a condo, apparently they chose this moment to actually do an inspection of my unit and my fire system. Anyways, back to our originally scheduled program. So 2 chunks of my career. So the first half, you know, I never felt like being a woman had any impact on my career. I didn't think there was a glass ceiling. I thought as long as you showed up, worked hard. I mean, quite honestly, I'm embarrassed to say it now. I was blessed, great opportunities, great male and female mentors and colleagues. And, you know, there was little situations, but nothing I felt was impactful. I always felt if I was just authentic in myself, worked hard, good things would happen. You know, there are a few little situations where, you know, I love to bake. So I'd bring baking to management team meetings, and often I was the only woman at the table. And I remember being taken aside in one of those meetings and someone saying, "Oh, you shouldn't do that. They won't think of you in the same way. You're belittling yourself." And I thought, yeah, no, I don't buy that. I'm going to be me and show up.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the beginning of my career. And then I'll say about 15 years ago, one of my female colleagues actually championed bringing in Taking the Stage, the Humphrey Group program for women. We called it Empowered Women. So we did a pilot, and I was part of that pilot for some of the senior women in the organization. And one of the first modules was a safe place for all of us to share our experiences in our career in terms of what we'd seen. And I mean, the stories I heard actually gobsmacked me. I really did not have an appreciation that other women had gone through some of the things they did. And I was infuriated. I was embarrassed. I didn't know. And as a result, I started to chat with friends. I started to do research. I started to observe more. And I think that's when it dawned on me. Then it hadn't been an equitable world. There was systemic discrimination. And I started to make it more of my mission to make sure that that was corrected. And when I moved into the CHRO role, I felt a tremendous obligation and accountability to make sure that I made a difference in that space, bringing a voice to the executive table, leading from behind and in front, raising awareness, and very much playing a coaching and mentor role to a number of individuals in the organization, females, of course, predominantly, but others as well. So, yeah, so being a woman, it's interesting, right? It's all about lived experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's fascinating that you just didn't have that experience yourself. So, you know, you got to be good to be lucky. So clearly you were a strong professional in your organization and well respected. But not as many women who would have been your peers at that time might have, as you say, had that same experience. Is there something about, you know, how you were brought up or your eternally optimistic disposition that you think contributed to that?
It's a great question. Actually, I had a grandfather who was probably my biggest mentor, and he taught me early that you can do anything. You work hard, have the right ethic. He used to teach me, you know, you have the right values, your peers will support you and they will promote you. If you are good at what you do and you're trusted. And I really took that to heart. And he always taught me, never sacrifice who you are, right? Always go to bed at night, being able to look in the mirror and feel good about what you did during the day.
Yeah.
And that just stuck with me. So I don't know whether that was it or not. And I mentioned earlier, I always had the benefit of having really excellent mentors and sponsors, and, you know, largely male, but a few females too. And I think that really made a difference for me.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because it's actually not the advice that we have to give women today that, you know, if you just do great work and are a great person, good things will happen to you. It's competitive. And when we're developing other women, we often talk to them about the point, you've got to be able to advocate for yourself. You've got to learn how to speak up. You've got to learn how to share your accomplishments and your aspirations. So there's obviously no one way that things will happen, and a nice opportunity for you. What I think is great is that while you had, I'm not going to say an easy path because I know you worked really, really hard, but that you're making a path for other women behind you, and your focus on community is a big part of that, right? Mm-hmm. Now, LCBO has achieved gender equity for senior leaders at the director level and above, which is a tremendous achievement. How important is it to have community amongst women in an organization, and what's that look like in your experience?
Yeah, you know, I think it's tremendously important. I would say once again, at the earlier part of my career, there were very few women leaders. Remarkably few leaders. And, you know, when I go back to when I considered stepping up to those first more senior kind of director level jobs with young children, I knew I wanted to do it, but I had some trepidation. And when I looked up to see who I could go for advice, couch, and some coaching, out of all the women who were there, and it was less than a handful, only one had children. So I sought out her advice, and she was very valuable. But it's interesting. I was also the first woman at the time who was a manager level, to go on mat leave. They had to figure out what to do with me. It was just like, bizarro. So, I mean, I share that for some of the younger members of our audience right now. But I think in terms of community, what I saw is how important it was for female leaders and women in general to have that community. So as I went into the CHRO role after having my eyes opened, I thought it was so important to cultivate that community. So I actually would gather the women executives together, and heck, we'd go out for drinks every month or two, and created that community because we were scattered across the organization. And as our numbers grew, which was wonderful, that network became very powerful and important for all of us because we have different things to share and different ways we can support one another. Not that there isn't room for our male colleagues, there absolutely is, but I think there's a special bond and type of support that we can give to one another. I also think about opportunities like sending women on the Judy Project, or opportunities where women can really grow, and what pivotal and incredible experience that was for some of the women that we sent, and nurturing and growing the women who are coming up through the pipeline and through the organization, and when there are grassroots initiatives to make sure that we really support them and create that network and safe place for everybody to feel that they've got someone they can talk to and be supported and coached by, so that they do take that advice and step up and go for it. And all the things that you said earlier that I think are so important, and that's the advice I would give now. Yeah. And I think there's a real opportunity to reach out more broadly, not just the community within your own company, but what I found myself doing is seeking out other organizations where I could pay it forward, like the YWCA Toronto, and how I could have a broader impact and make a difference. So I think that community is incredibly important.
And different levels. You've talked about the community within your organization, within a level within an organization, and then your broader community, which is terrific. Can you talk a little bit more about that accountability you feel around paying it forward, and maybe what being on the YWCA board has meant for you? Because it's, you've been there 6 years. That's been a big commitment and an important community that you're supporting.
Absolutely. I mentioned earlier that there's that tremendous accountability and that privilege I feel I have, and I feel I have to leverage. In terms of the why, for me, once again, it goes back to sometimes you can know so little based on your lived experience. And I think as I became more and more aware, and I've got so much more to learn in terms of the WISE mandate is to make a difference in the life of marginalized women and girls. And we've just come out with an even bolder statement, which I won't share right now because we haven't rolled it out, but to make a radical difference so that there no longer is gender discrimination and bias, and it is an equitable society. So when I see, particularly in light of the pandemic, the disproportionate impact that this has had on women who are predominantly in frontline worker roles, they have families at home. Our women's shelters are full to the rafters, and abuse is gone through the roof because people are at home. It's just gut-wrenching and heartbreaking to see that, and the opportunity to make a difference and support in that community where we have the opportunity to do that. So I would say the whole intersectionality piece of it has become an area that I need to understand, and all of us, I think, do.
It's interesting, when we spoke before about your involvement in the community, I remember asking you, so what can we do, right? There are a lot of women who would like to make sure that they're contributing, and we're not able to drop in on a shelter and volunteer. Right. We can't necessarily even bring our suits to Dress for Success to support that way. So share with us what your ideas are for other women and men on this to how can we show up differently?
Yeah, I know it's a really great question. And it is a difficult one in light of the times. I think there's a number of areas where we can do that. I mean, obviously there's always financial. Financial always is good, right? Because those funds can go to very different things and places. It can be sharing your time in terms of individuals who are trying to get back into the workplace, whether it's, you know, some people might be able to give a resume writing course, others might be able to coach in terms of interviewing skills. What I would say in that area is, you know, there's a number of websites where you can connect with your passion and where you feel you're going to get the most satisfaction from, and go out and research it and find those areas where you can make that contribution. It can be in time, it can be in dollars, it can be in a variety of ways. It can be giving your time through boards. It can be, I mean, there's a number of areas where you can make a difference, but it's vast. But I think the most important thing is connecting to what you're passionate about.
Going back to being authentic, right? Continues to this.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, you and both LCBO and OPG have demonstrated commitment to advancing women. You've been recognized for that. In your experience, what's been the critical for organizations to really focus on? Because we want to move from platitudes to performance in this area, right?
Yeah. And quite honestly, it's not any different than anything else that you want to move forward in an organization. At the crux of it, I think one of the most important things is visible leadership support that's grounded in passion and values, right? So you need an executive team who really believes in it and cares, and be willing to stay the course, because it's a long journey, and really put that into action, whether it be a stated vision, which is just the beginning, and then it rolls into, I mean, that phrase, what gets measured, get done. So really having a strategy, a plan with milestones, with metrics, weaving it into all the practices and policies that you have in the organization, having your communications demonstrate, whether it's internally or externally in your brands, that you're living your values. And I mean, you have to see me to be me. I go back to that. So over time, making sure that all parts of the organization can see themselves. And it's a real journey. We're certainly not there yet, and I don't think many organizations are, but I truly believe it's about that sustained, visible leadership commitment, and then the actions to follow it.
You know, what you said right up front was, it's the same, and, you know, I'll label it any other strategic initiative that you really need to take on as an organization. And all the change management principles, all the strategy and planning principles really need to apply in the same way for this.
They really do. Yeah. There's no secret sauce, I don't think.
Yeah, it would be lovely to say, you know, I know you don't have time for everything, so just do these one or two things and you'll be golden, right? Mm-hmm. Terrific. Okay, so this is going to be the last question before we open it up to the Q&A. So for those of you who are watching, start filling up the Q&A for us as well. And this is just really saying, you know, the pandemic has been tough. The pandemic has been especially tough for women. And I know you've talked about the importance of mentorship and developing other women. What are you telling other women in today's context about managing their career, and what advice do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it runs the continuum and goes back to an earlier point we were making about it depends where you're at and what time in your career. Because frankly, I can't even imagine having young children right now and being at home and juggling all of those competing demands. The stress level must be so challenging and difficult. And I think the first thing is what we would tell almost all of our employees is be kind to yourself. You know, make sure that self-care is first and foremost on your list of things that you need to take care of, because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others' people. So that's a big one. You know, don't be hard on yourself. And I think as an organization, and I think there's a lot of HR professionals probably in the audience, I think that there's a real opportunity for us to influence the organization to take a much more compassionate and empathetic approach to how we're managing through the pandemic. Because I think initially we were just on pure adrenaline to get through this. And now we are, I mean, look what's happening today in Ontario and across the country, right? We are going to have some sustained fortitude and resilience to get through this puppy. And that means, as an organization, looking at how we can prioritize importance versus urgency, and really, I think, take a very empathetic approach to our employees and be supportive. I will say that I think there's also a tremendous opportunity for women and organizations in general, but some of the skills that have become so important during the pandemic, and increasingly so in the new workplace, around collaboration and compassion and empathetic leadership, are things, not to be gender stereotypical, but we tend to excel at. And I think this is a great time for women to lean in and also have a tremendous impact and support the culture and jump in there and take those risks and make their voice heard.
That's terrific advice for women at any level, at any stage in their career. I know that after a year of a very fast-paced marathon is what it really feels like. We are all tired. The first question from the Q&A is kind of interesting, as it really talks about, and you started to mention it, the HR function. And women in particular in the HR function, it's where you've grown up mostly. Is there particular advice that you have for women in that function around how to be successful and to ensure that you continue to advance your career?
Yes. Now, would it be unique to a woman? Not necessarily, but it would probably be more poignant for a woman, given in general how we tend to operate. So I would say take your space up. Don't minimize your role or the function, because unlike historically, when it would have been perceived as a very tactical function, that has changed. And if you think about where we're at in the world, HR has such an incredibly important part to play in the organization. And do not ever think you need to minimize your voice, right? I think that's the most important advice I can give. Always get to know the business. Never say, I don't understand finance or the numbers. Please don't say that. And leverage your networks, right? Look up and out, leverage your networks. I'll give a plug for the Strategic Capability Network and some of the networks they have for HR. They have great CHRO networks. They have other networks. And I think it's really important that, you know, once again, to that community piece, that we tap into that and leverage it, because we're stronger together, as is so often the case.
Interesting. Okay. The next question here, Gary asks, what are your thoughts on mentoring women to emulate masculine leadership traits? There's been increasing literature and thought leadership on coaching women to become more like executives / primarily men, and have that executive presence, versus coaching women to be even more of themselves. Is it a balance? Is it one over the other?
I think that's a really fascinating question. Trying to be PC about this one. I would say that I am hopeful that over time, we will adjust what we think an effective executive presence looks like. It doesn't have to be a 42 regular that rules with an iron fist. I think that as organizations, we need to develop what a good leader looks like, and then not coach to that versus coaching by gender. But Gary, I fully appreciate, because I have lived experience where people think that being more forceful is more effective than maybe the velvet glove. So I think there are different approaches, and I think there is, to your point around that, certainly there is research that shows that women get talked over, that there are areas where, taking up your space at the meeting table, women would tend to minimize, men just put all their stuff all over and so I think there is an opportunity for women to be more assertive in their transactions in business. However, I am a firm believer that you do need to stay true to your authentic self, because if you're not, that incongruency shows up, and in turn, you're just not going to be happy either. So I think that there's a blend, and I personally think that there are skills that women bring to the table around collaboration that will make for a much more effective management team.
Yeah. I go back to what you say about being authentic. There is no one way. And that truly, that redefining leadership is something that so many organizations, society is doing right now around what do we need going forward. And it's not going to be the same as what we believe we needed in the 70s, 80s, 2010, right? It's going to be different going forward. Yeah, great question. Okay, HR is often seen as a service function. As an HR VP, how do you suggest leaders see you as that strategic partner rather than a transaction type relationship?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. And it goes back to making sure you understand the business and the corporate strategy, and HR having a people strategy that supports the business strategy and is part of it, versus a function that's just doing the day-to-day stuff. So if you think about some of the big ticket things that are at play right now in the world and the environment, HR definitely has a strategic role to play in terms of leadership, in terms of culture, in terms of defining the new world of work, in terms of leveraging data analytics in order to inform how we do our workforce planning, in terms of diversity and inclusion and mental health, how we define and build a culture that will attract the best and brightest, and how we develop those people so we can grow a really healthy workforce that's highly productive. So in my mind, it's around how you position the function and how you make sure that you're a strategic player at the table and speak the language of the business.
This is definitely an era where the human resource function, organizational development, leadership development is going to make a huge impact on organizations. There's no better time to show your strategic capabilities, right?
Darn good time to be in HR, right?
Absolutely. Here's an interesting question for you, Barb. Can you share some grassroots initiatives being done at LCBO currently to achieve gender equity?
Yeah, absolutely. I know one of my key team leaders is on the call. I should have her answer it. So we actually just got our diversity, belonging, and inclusion strategy and action plan approved after having done a full-scale current state assessment by KPMG. And in terms of, it varies across the board in terms of different initiatives. I will shout out one that we've already done, and it was it was a reaction to the George Floyd horrible situation that occurred about a year ago today. And I'll give a shout out to one of my team, Siobhan, who's on the call right now. And it was her nimble and agile and brave thinking that created something called Spark the Conversations. So 1 hour sessions to address over a series of weeks, 6 very important topics, whether it be microaggressions, Black Lives Matter, a series of things. So that's one. If we think about other areas, you can broaden it. I mean, all of us, we're going to embark upon self-identification. We don't have the data yet, so that's a small one. If you think about how you can make sure from a corporate brand and your sustainability platform, partnering with organizations like the LCBO just did in terms of fundraising, we partnered with Women's College Hospital, which is an equity-seeking hospital. And as part of that, the funds will go back to the hospital. But as well, we are going to fund a couple of a couple of scholarships, not a couple, a number of scholarships for women in the industry to be, to give them an opportunity to improve. So we're weaving things throughout the organization, not just in talent-related approaches, which we're also doing in our leadership development programs and outreach. But I think it's, what we're very much trying to do is not look at it specifically from an HR perspective, but weaving it into the DNA of the whole organization. We're about to, and I'm sure a lot of organizations of people who are on the call today, looking at a supplier code that supports some piece of the criteria being attached to a DEI criterion. So there's I could go on for a long time about it, but I think there's a number, and we are just about to, we haven't got DRGs yet. And I think there's a lot of companies on this call who probably have done that as well. So that's in our future.
Those tend to be terrific just for being able to listen and understand what's important from a grassroots level as well. I love though that you're not containing your initiatives and how you want to make a difference to only within LCBO, but also into the community where you live and work, and into the supplier network, the full supply chain, which is a way of really putting much more at stake than just saying you're putting a few initiatives in place, right? So it goes so much further than that.
And one of the things I'll just hook back into is that visible leadership support. So one of the things we did is to support our DEI initiative or strategy is to make sure that we actually created an Inclusion Leadership Council, and that's cross-functional, obviously across the organization, so that as an organization, we have key champions in each of our businesses, so that as we action our strategy, that we have all of those thought leaders in place. And the other thing I'll hook it into is our mental health strategy, because if you're looking at an inclusive workplace, you have to make sure you make those linkages.
Here's a question from Ann Davies. As our world changes, have you seen different kinds of roles emerge at LCBO that leverage different skill sets? What about the workforce of the future for certain?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Anne. Now, I've only been at the LCBO for about 8 months now. So I think certainly in terms of technology, which we've all seen is different, and different areas in the business leveraging those data analytics, so the data analytics types. As I think about our organization, which is 80% plus retail stores based, not a huge shift in terms of that, more in terms of our approach. Perhaps the digital tsunami in the e-com space, right, which I think a lot of retailers are grappling with right now. But I would say right now, in terms of the retail space, we haven't seen a big shift in that. So it's a good question. I'm sure it will come, but I can't give you really good examples other than that.
As you think about how vaccinations are being rolled out, and we're trying to just define what the work environment will look like in the next era, I'll call it. Do you see a lot of work from home? Obviously not for your retail, but for your other employees, and switching to more flexible arrangements?
Yeah, certainly, like all other businesses, our corporate employees have been working home for the lion's share of the last year. Obviously, as you said, our retail employees and our distribution center employees have been at the workplace. So first and foremost, keeping them safe and healthy and protected has been paramount. In terms of our corporate employees, this just happens to coincide with us moving to a new head office work location, which will be open concept in the fall. So us working from home has been a tremendous accelerant. And I think that the thought for any business going back full time to working in the office is probably not going to happen, right? I think we've all got used to a more flexible work option, which provides balance for everyone. The question will be, I think it will be some time for us all to adjust to determine what the right balance is for that. And I think it'll very much depend on your business, but certainly we've spent some time and energy developing our flex work policy and the tools and the framework for implementing that when we get to the place where we're actually coming back into the office.
And we will get there.
We will, darn it, we will get there.
One of the questions here is, what advice would you give someone who is in lower middle management, who has growth potential and dreams, but does have smaller children under age 10 and wants to keep balance? Don't want being a mother and having children to hold me back, but I also don't want to sacrifice this time I won't get back. I work from home permanently and have great balance right now, as I made this transition to this role with work-life integration in mind.
That's an amazing question. And, you know, I go back to me, you know, coming home to flat mommy at the table, and, you know, that balance is so incredibly important. There's going to be different times in your life when you can make choices to give more of yourself or your time, depending where you're at from a family perspective. I guess there's a few things I'd say in terms of opportunities. If you only have limited time available to you, one, you know, that whole notion of, you know, life's a jungle gym, or careers are a jungle gym, not a ladder. So look for those really great opportunities that might be lateral opportunities, so you can do that work-life balance that will give you better experience and position you for when you're ready to be able to have a bigger time investment. The second would be really selective when you put your hands up for special opportunities, that they're the ones you really want to go after and get the experience on. Cultivate your networks. And that self-care piece is still really important too. But I would say cultivate some really good mentors as well, and be selective about those development and stretch opportunities so you can juggle it. And it won't always be possible. And maybe recognizing that is a big part of it as well.
That's an interesting, it feels like it's the only time you're going to have an opportunity sometimes to take a move or to accept a promotion. But we've got hopefully long careers ahead of us, and exactly. Recognizing that different times, different priorities, right?
And I guess one of the pieces of advice that CFO gave me way back when, the one who had children, when I was thinking about it, was, if you can, outsource as much as you can, and don't be worried if the bed gets made or the house isn't completely clean all the time. And it may sound like a little thing, and have a great communication with your partner, if you have a partner, in terms of making sure you share things and share the duties. And that home calendar of events is God, that's a Bible.
Whether it's digital or old school and on
exactly. Most important event on Sunday night was creating that calendar of who had to be where, when, and how it all fit together.
Love it. Hopefully that helped. Here's an interesting question. HR, for this anonymous attendee, is experiencing C-level and VP resistance regarding setting up a women's internal network group. We do not currently have one. Do you have any recommendations on how to market the launch? And you know, this goes back to that age-old question: do women need their own communities for growth and development and support, or do you integrate and have it all one sort of leadership community, maybe?
So 2 questions in that. I think there is the need for both. Actually, I think there's a real opportunity and value for having women only, just as there is a value in having other groups have their own communities, because there's some real value in that as a safe place and to grow. But I think there's it's important also for it to be an integrated community to grow together. Going back to the first question, Let me think about that. Can you repeat it one more time, the beginning of it?
Yeah, they're really getting resistance from the top of the house, if you will, about setting up a women's internal network group. And how would you overcome that?
So I think I would do a couple of things. I would find a champion who can help be there with me and find the compelling business reasons in case. So present it in a business, factual perspective and how it will support the organization's success. And I'm not saying that this is what's being done, unless from a emotional, this is a good thing to do. But I always find that you can do both, right? And they're both really valid. But if you can present it in a very business-like fashion and the potential results, it ends up winning the day, particularly if you can find that champion.
It's interesting that right now we know that retention is an issue, right? Some of the statistics are showing that anywhere from 40%, 50% plus of people are looking to move. So I would suggest there's a great opportunity to talk about how engagement of any community is super important for your retention strategies, right? And if there's some group who feel that it would be helpful for them to feel closer, to create community, that's got to be an opportunity from a retention strategy even to make that happen.
For sure. So connected to the corporate strategy, to your employee value proposition, to productivity, to engagement. That data is there for business cases. So those are the linkages. I should have been clearer, but yeah, thank you, Margot. That's exactly where I would go with it in terms of the business case and the compelling reasons.
This one goes back to your personal experience, Barb. Can you comment whether you feel your male mentors or sponsors treated you as a female differently versus their male mentees or sponsorees, if you will?
I think there was a spectrum. It ran the spectrum of those who were being a lot more paternal and protective to the ones who are, you get out there and you just show them. So it was a real spectrum. And I think there's value in having that spectrum of sponsors and mentors, because that's what you're up against in the workplace. So I think there's also a reverse mentoring opportunity there, just as there is for HR when they're at the table, and whether it be in a succession discussion where I'm sure many people in the audience can identify with this, when you'll be talking about candidates, and God, I hope it doesn't happen as much now, but you'll mention a female candidate, say, well, she's got young kids, she wouldn't be able to handle it, right? And they wouldn't say that about a man. So I think there's some reverse mentoring that's an opportunity there, which I certainly use sometimes with some of my mentors, but I had a real spectrum and they all had value.
There's a real opportunity, and you've mentioned it several times, for women to find good mentors and sponsors. And again, there are some great organizational programs, but you don't need to wait for that. I've rarely met an executive who said, I won't talk to you, or I won't share some time and some experience with someone who has aspirations to grow and develop. So I think that's a really important, that you need a number of mentors, find a number of different folks who can actually provide you with that kind of variety too. Really good. Here's one: if you are, even good things taken too far can become problematic, e.g. reverse discrimination. Where do you draw the line with respect to your efforts to drive greater inclusion?
So you want to create an equitable workplace where people are feeling valued and heard, and it's seen that way. And I think you have to draw the line at a place where that is the case. And, it's that age-old debate over equality versus equity. And I think equity is the place we need to be. You want to give everybody, you want to help everybody get to the same starting place. And I think raising awareness around unconscious bias and a number of other key things helps in a workplace. when you do get counters of, well, you know, undue favoritism, or you're making it too easy, or so I think that education is really key to laying the foundation.
And there's it's hard to you can't really, it's not about statistics, right? It's about creating an inclusive environment where everyone feels comfortable bringing their full self, so you can have the innovation, stronger decision making, and that's really where, you know, going back to the business imperative that you've talked about can be so important.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Okay, we're coming up to our last couple of questions here. In terms of, well, here's another one from the HR field. What advice would you give to someone that is new in the HR field?
Be a sponge, be open-minded, you know, talk to as many people as you can. As you know, just a few minutes ago, people love talking about themselves, and people love talking about their experiences. So do as much chatting and connecting as you can, and experience as much as you can. So I would say be super open-minded, and open yourself up to experiences, opportunities, people. And the more you do that, the more you'll build up your skills and resume and your networks, but have a better understanding of what you really enjoy and derive passion and satisfaction.
Terrific advice. All right, Barb, we're down to just a couple of minutes before we have to close our session. I want to thank you so much, and I want to give you the floor for any final comments or insights to share with our viewers today.
So I guess, you know, the one thing I should have started with is when I was approached by LHH to do this, I was so incredibly humbled, because I looked at some of the other speakers and they are such amazing women, that I found myself going back to that imposter syndrome thing that, you know, sometimes we as women do. And I had to stop myself. And I think in terms of advice, I'd say to all of us, don't let that imposter sit on your shoulder and should you or tell you what to do. Take risks, believe in yourself, be authentic, really be the best self, be your best self. Find that trusted circle of people who are your biggest cheerleaders and also your most constructive coaches. Pay it forward. And just remember that we as women, and for the HR professionals on the call, we bring a really valuable voice to the table, and you shouldn't question that. You should bring it proudly and do it with vigor and passion and with everything you got.
That's why you were invited to the table. That's why you're in the role. Terrific advice, Barb. I want to thank you again. You have accomplished so much. If you haven't thought about it, just think of the tens of thousands of people that you've had an impact on their lives already over the course of your career. And that's something to be very proud of. So no need for any imposters over there. I want to thank you again for your time and everything that you've shared with me and with our viewers today. And a reminder to all the viewers, we have our final in our 5-part conversation series next week. Hope that you'll be able to join in on Tuesday. We'll be able to have a conversation with Beth Wilson from Denton's, and look for the YouTube video of this conversation and the others. They're available for you to share, to review, and for anyone who's missed it to be able to catch up. Thanks again to everybody. Have a really wonderful week. And thanks again to you, Barb. You're terrific to have you on today. Bye for now.